Law Matters. Of course it does. Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes, your host and moderator. As we tell you, this program was created to educate, inform, and help you with law matters because the law matters. Understand the law better, and you're in a better position to decide how to protect yourself, your family, and your business. We continue each session to provide the information and resources that'll help you determine whether you need or want to contact a lawyer. Perhaps we'll help you to determine that you can actually handle some issues yourself. Either way, if you do need additional counsel, you'll be better prepared, so will the person who you select. Our goal, of course, is to save you time and money and to achieve the best possible results. We, once again, and always want to welcome and thank David Bazar, Attorney Bazar.
Thank you.
With the Bazar & Associates law firm in East Providence. He continues to offer his expertise and experience and insights on the various issues that we tackle. So today, credit card companies in bankruptcy, maybe we can help you avoid some of the problems perhaps associated with post-holiday shopping. This reportedly to be the first ever holiday shopping period that's the $1 trillion buy. Maybe you have those issues. Maybe you have not just post-holiday shopping issues, but maybe it's the result of a year's worth of accumulated debt or medical expenses. So what do? This will be strategic, perhaps some practical strategies and tactics on how to handle them. So let's get started. What's the who, what, when, where, why when you do this? People have credit cards now, many, maybe too many. Timing, they say, is everything. What do? It's just after the holidays, you bought too much, you're in over your head, New Year's coming. What do?
So the first thing you want to try to do is assess where you are economically, financially. What is your plan going forward? What is your income coming in? What are your expenses? And once you take a look at all of that, if you're not in too far over your head, but it's too much because of all the different cards you have, one of the first things I would probably recommend is to just look at a consolidation of the debt, whether a personal loan, a refinance if you have a home or can take out an equity line, just something to lower the interest rates and consolidate the payment. Here's the catch to that. The first thing I said is the most important, which is you have to look at your whole financial picture and make sure that this is something that you're going to fix and not just put a Band-Aid on. In other words, I'm going to consolidate my debt. I'm going to refinance my loan and my house perhaps to do it. And you're going to be in the same place again this time next year. That's not a way to do it. But if it's, yeah, I did this, I had, as you said, maybe at the beginning, some medical expenses that got out of control, or I was out of work for a period of time that I couldn't make up the time for. But my forward-looking view is it's going to be fine, and I can make enough money, and I can pay my bills and all of that. Then the first place I would start is a consolidation of the debt.
So along those lines, David, would you ever suggest, not that you're the banker, but would you ever suggest that someone take their credit card debt and roll it over into a home equity line of credit that could take them 10 years to pay off the debt? It might be at a lower rate, but is that a smart move? Thoughts on that?
Well, again, if you look at the whole picture and determine whether or not it's something you're going to pay off much quicker than the 10 years. Because remember, once you consolidate it and the interest rate is lower and it's one payment and you're not going to use those cards again, so part of the plan is cut them up, maybe keep one for an emergency, but be able to live on your own budget. So if you can do that, then I wouldn't have a big problem. I'm not a financial advisor, I'd speak to one, but I wouldn't have a big problem consolidating into one loan that the payment of, if you just made all of those minimum card payments you had and consolidated that into this payment, might pay it off in a much quicker period of time. So I would have to do the math, and you have to sit down and do the math and be committed to the program before I would ever recommend doing something like that.
So there are so many credit card companies out there. They're all vying for your business, but once you have them, maybe you've opened too many or you have run up a very high debt. It's often advisable to renegotiate that. I don't know that you need a lawyer to do that. There are certainly things that we found online that said, here is even a script on how to do that. Is that generally advisable? Do you think that that has terrible consequences or any kind of consequences, David?
Well, I think the first part of what you're talking about, which is to say, I've got all this debt, I've got these high interest rates. The last thing the credit card company wants you to do is file bankruptcy. So the next step is, well, we're not going to borrow money on a home to pay it off because we're not committed to the plan necessarily, and it's a one-time fix. I wouldn't want someone to be doing this all the time. So the next step is, what can we do with our outstanding balances on all these credit cards? And sometimes one of the things that happens is you get these introductory offers, and the temptation is to say, well, let me roll the balance of this high interest card into this lower interest rate card. And if it's not just a 6-month zero and then it goes to the same high interest rate, yeah, if you get a lower interest rate after that, that might not be a bad plan if you have that option. If you don't have that option, then you're correct. You should speak to the credit card company and say, listen, I want to renegotiate the interest rate. I don't want to have to file bankruptcy, and speak to them and see if you can make any progress that way.
So there are thoughts about whether it's better or maybe just different when you ask for the better interest rate from your credit card company. Okay, it's right after the holidays, everyone's done their maxing out or whatever they've done. So you know that come your January statement, you're likely to see the big number. Is it better to, if you're not really struggling with debt, but you just know that you should be able to get a better rate, is it okay to call before you even get that statement and say, I think I'd really like you to consider lowering my interest payment. I've been a customer for X years.
So
Do it
again,
now or not do it?
I'm not a financial advisor, but from a legal perspective and from a common sense point of view, it would certainly seem to me, if you've been a good customer, you've always paid on time, you've paid more than the minimums, that to call and suggest that that's something you want to do shouldn't have a negative impact on your credit, because you're paying and you've never missed a payment, and all you're asking them to do is give you a deal that's commensurate with the kind of customer you've been. So again, with the caveat that I'm not a financial advisor.
Fair enough, sure.
I can't tell you that it won't affect your credit, but as an attorney and from a common sense point of view, why would it affect your credit if you've always made your payments, paid more than the minimum, and all you're saying is, I want the best deal that you give to your best customers because I'm one of your best customers.
And you know, when you mention that, David, what comes to mind is that it's very expensive for credit card companies to lose a customer. They never want to. It's better to keep the customer if they can. If you are asking your credit card company for an interest, a lower interest rate, maybe initially they say no. As I've read about this, it's probably not the end of the road. You actually could come back and say, well, I'm being wooed by, I received another offer from one of my other credit card companies. I know I've been with you for so long. I'd really like to stay, but, and then you get to counteroffer.
Right.
Better terms, better rates, skip a payment, or whatever their other options might be.
Yeah, I think you should be able to leverage that. And they may come back with you, well, roll over your account from the other credit card company and we'll give you the 0% for a 6-month deal. So.
Yes, well, I guess it's right to ask about if there's a promotional rate. That's a good point.
Yeah, yeah.
That's good.
So, and those are certainly some ways to lower the interest rate for a period of time, make extra payment on the card, and get the balance lowered quicker.
So if someone really isn't in the place where they're bankrupt, but they see troubles happen, say there is a serious illness, and you know that people then tend to either tap out the home equity or just ride that credit card and up to its upper limits and exceeding and asking for a higher limit. If you find that someone's in that situation, do you think, or have you ever found that credit card companies are willing to give someone a break because there's extenuating circumstances, a one-time hit such as a serious medical issue?
So again, as an attorney, not a financial advisor, I would tell you that would make sense. And they don't want you to do two things. They don't want you to file bankruptcy, and they don't really want to negotiate the debt. In other words, there's these companies out there that say, give us all of your debt, and you pay us, and we'll negotiate and pay off your credit card companies. And so what they're doing is they are sort of consolidating your debt, but they're negotiating the balances that's on that debt, so they're not paying back the entire amount of principal that you've borrowed. So the credit card companies want to get all their money back plus as much of the interest they want. So or they can get. So if you negotiate directly with them, you're not going to get the same deal that these credit consolidating companies can get, but you should be able to get a deal because they don't want you to take that next step.
It makes sense. If it's just a matter of a short-term situation, maybe 30 days, something, maybe we're out of the country, before you get hit with interest and penalties, do you ever hear that there's value in being in advance of it, calling and say, could you just change my statement date, scheduled date?
Yeah.
Is that worthwhile or not worthwhile?
Yeah, of course it is. If it's really a one-time thing and you just need to push it off for a little bit, the credit card company is going to get all of their interest. They're just going to add it on to the next bill, but at least you're not getting dinged for missing a payment and having that against your credit. Because remember, what they do is they report every month whether or not you've made your payment on time. So if you push out the payment due date and make it by that date, you haven't missed a payment, so you're not going to get reported as having been behind on your payments.
So you still keep your credit history if you're making a payment, even if you're paying it more than you should?
Yeah, as long as you're paying on the due date that you've now renegotiated.
When do credit card companies shut you off, so to speak? First month that you don't pay, 3, 6, does it vary? Do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, I think it depends. It depends on your history with the company and the company itself. I'm sure they all have their own rules and what they want to follow. But certainly if you start missing payments, they're going to start lowering. They're going to raise the interest rate and they're going to lower the credit available.
Bad combination.
Yeah.
So some of these things that we're talking about thus far seems like the average consumer can do on his or her own. Do you ever get calls to, as the lawyer, be the heavy and renegotiate before someone is bankrupt? Do you ever get those calls?
I don't do that personally, but I'm sure lawyers, especially lawyers who do bankruptcy, might have a first step in place to say either you or we or we'll refer you to somebody to start renegotiating some of this debt prior to bankruptcy. It's sort of in the old days when we had all these mortgage foreclosures, you could go to mediation and try to mediate some kind of resolution to what you owed on your mortgage and have a period of time where the loan was modified. It's sort of like a loan modification on the credit card side.
So something crossed my mind as we were talking about that, which is over so many topics that we've discussed in this Law Matters segment, you've so often said, get documentation, get documentation. If you do speak to someone about a different term, interest rate, or whatever, should you ask, do you need to ask for that person to send you something in writing? Can
Yes.
you? Will they?
You need to. And so I would first of all get the name of the person that you spoke to, so you have that. And as you know, when you call many of these places, they'll say this call may be recorded for whatever purposes.
Yes.
So make sure that they give you their name so that if you don't get the information that you're looking for sent to you, and it's going to come to you in writing, and I don't know if they'll send it by email or regular mail, but you should get that. So that if you have to call back, you can say on such and such a date at such and such a time I spoke to Deb, and this is what we talked to, and this is what we agreed to, and I haven't received anything. So if you don't have it notes in the computer, which they should have, please pull the recording. You'll hear that we spoke, and this is what we agreed to.
Good point. Remind them of that. That's good. That's a good point. And apparently, once you get involved in this kind of renegotiation with credit card companies, actually with other service companies, there are often levels. The first person. So, for example, as I have read, if you just need to change the payment date from the 1st to the 15th or the 30th, that your first line of defense, which is the customer service, they might be able to just
Right.
authorize that and make a computer entry. But if you needed to reduce the rate, they might be above their pay grade, and
Right.
you might need to ask for someone else. Should you say, may I speak to someone else if they say I can't do that, or should you just call back, or what makes sense
No,
to do?
ask right then and there to speak to the next person.
And then there's another person, there's another department, then there's a supervisor.
Right.
And as you're pointing out, maybe that's the time that the onus is on you to write down every person's name in every department that you were
I would.
volleyed to.
And as you go along, the note should be what time the date, what time you spoke to him, what you talked about, and where you went next.
Do most people do that, or do you think that they just absolutely say, I talked to 5 people and I just can't possibly?
There are a lot of people who do it, but not enough, so do
Boy,
it.
buyer beware or
Yeah.
consumer beware. At what point do you think that someone should just stop looking for better rates and go elsewhere? As you pointed out, there are credit
Consolidation
companies. There are, well, even credit counselors, but I think that those are scam. Should
Well,
we beware of
there's
those?
different things, and it depends what you need and what it is. So I don't know if you're referring to credit counselors as these companies that buy the debt and then pay it down and you pay them. There are some that are better than others. You can check Better Business Bureau or whoever rates those companies and just find the company that's the highest rated. And that's the companies that you're at the end of your rope. You haven't been able to negotiate anything down. There's no way for you to consolidate it on your own. You can't afford even the monthly payments, or that's a stretch. So contact them after you find out which is the best one, and give them your situation and find out what kind of deal they might be able to make for you. That's the step before bankruptcy, perhaps.
Yes. So it seems that there are so many options and sources of information. Even Credit Karma, or one of those kinds of companies, will say, here's what you should know to renegotiate, or credit card compare something.com that gives you some of these options and steps to avoid getting into trouble. It seems like there's so much that's available that it should avoid bankruptcy. I don't know if there are more or less these days than ever before, but I hear that come the first of the year, there are many people who just can't carry on any longer.
Yeah, so you're correct. And there's a lot of do-it-yourself places on the internet and other areas where you can try to help work this out before you have to call a lawyer and file a bankruptcy or take some other route. But you're right, the beginning of the year, after the holidays wear off, 2 people seem to get busy in the law practice. Attorneys that do bankruptcy and attorneys that do family court.
For divorces.
They didn't like their present.
What happens, so we've talked about the credit card and how to deal with debt, but if it gets to the point where you just feel that you can't go on any longer, there is the next step. If someone thinks that they need to declare bankruptcy, I imagine that too is something that is a do-it-yourself online, but I imagine it's fraught with much trouble. How about if you don't, and tell us why?
Right. So even as an attorney who doesn't practice in the field of bankruptcy, I wouldn't do a bankruptcy for somebody or for myself on my own. There are too many little nuances that go into it, too many exemptions. So when you file bankruptcy, it's a very big application, and there's a lot of things that go into it. It's your assets and your liabilities. And so what you're basically doing is saying to the bankruptcy court, here's everything I have, and here's everybody I owe and what I owe. And some debts are what are called secured debts, mortgage on a house, a loan for a car secured by the car. And then there's unsecured debt, credit card debt, personal loans, things of that nature.
What's a car loan?
A car loan is secured by the car, so it's a secured debt. And there are different rules that go into each of those types of debts, and then there are different exemptions that can apply to what assets you're allowed to keep and what assets are available to pay all of this debt off. And as I said, it's complicated, and there are 2 different ways you can get exemptions. There are federal exemptions, and then there are state exemptions. And depending on what your assets are, you might be better off filing and asking for the federal exemptions, or you may be better off filing and asking for the state exemptions. So it's complicated. and it's time consuming, and it's not something you should do on your own.
I know people try to save money whenever they can, and if there's a something.com that gives them an option, I can see where they would want to explore that if they figure they're in debt already. Why do I want to pay a lawyer even more? And so it goes. But there's a Chapter 7, there's a Chapter 11, there's a Chapter 13. Who decides what that is? Does a lawyer do that?
There are rules from the court that
Yes.
decide which one you can file for. And then there's also some discretion on which one should you file for.
There is discretion?
There can be. I mean, you may qualify for a 7, which is a total liquidation. All the assets go that aren't exempt.
You are selling off everything?
Well, not
or
necessarily,
giving it away?
because there are exemptions.
Okay, your
And
house.
So if you have a homestead exemption because you use the state rules, yes, that can be exempt. But then, of course, you have the mortgage on the house that you have to continue to pay. Do you reaffirm that mortgage or don't you reaffirm the mortgage? That's something you need to ask a bankruptcy attorney. You don't necessarily have to, but you have to keep paying it. You have your car. So if you have a car that's fully paid for, is that exempt, or are you going to lose your car? It may be exempt. You have tools of
Why
your
would
trade.
it ever be exempt?
Because there are different exemptions that apply for different things.
What a nuance that is.
So if you have tools of your trade, they may be exempt. You might not have to sell your tools because they want you to still be able to earn an income. So all of these things are different decisions that have to be made. And so the difference between a Chapter 7, which is the liquidation and you're done and you don't have to pay any debt anymore, and an individual with a 13, a business with an 11, there are all different rules that go into it and what you have to do and what the outcome might be.
What if you're a business, Chapter 7 versus Chapter 11? If you're a large business, does that automatically put you in Chapter 11?
It doesn't matter on the size, it matters on the income and the assets and the liabilities.
So what the owner's income is?
No, the business.
The business's income, okay. And if you are a sole proprietor, you could be considered a small business, or are
Well,
you
if you're a
still
sole
individual?
proprietor and you haven't incorporated because you're a sole proprietor, it's an individual situation because you are the business.
And would a lawyer who handles bankruptcy, who isn't a banker or isn't a financial advisor, they're the ones who would be able to say, look at how much money you have for income or your Social Security or what your payouts are, and be able to say, well, I think that you can, the restructure, which is what, 11 and
Or 13.
Yes, we think you can swing this, and we advise that you do or don't. That's what happens?
Well, yeah, and they'll also tell you that based on the rules. If you have a certain amount of income and you're over the income that level that you're allowed to have to file a straight 7, they'll tell you, well, you have to file this, and this is what you can expect because they have the experience to go and have been through it before.
How does your credit FICO score get affected the minute you do 7 versus 11 versus 13? Do they all get the same hit?
I don't know.
Do they get it for the same period of time, I wonder?
Yeah.
I wondered, so the other thing that I read that was very interesting is that while you were underway, whether it was 7 or 11 or 13, and I guess some have longer periods of time with which to clear them, depending on what your situation is, the thought or the wisdom is that you should keep checking your credit score, and it made me wonder why that would possibly be, but apparently it's because once you're on the other side of this, you will want to see what's being recorded as having been a payment, because that will then go to establish your next need when you once again on the other side of this hopefully want to get a credit
Well, it
card
makes
or
sense
something.
that once you've gone through the bankruptcy, you immediately start taking steps to repair your credit score. And there are credit advisors out there who can tell you, do this, do this. For example, you may want to go and get a small credit card. It may be one of those credit cards that has collateral. It's a collateralized card. In other words, you put up the money for the card, but you buy things with it and you pay it off every month. And that may be, again, I'm not a credit advisor, one way to start showing you're good with credit and you've learned your lesson and you're starting to come out on the other side, as you said.
Wouldn't that also be true for, say, a young person who has no credit because they've had no credit history, but if they're going to start it, they start it with, here's the money up front and I'll pay, and here you can see that I have a transactional history that's reputable. And
Right, and one thing I've done, for example, with my daughters is they buy a car. Now, they may not qualify to get the car loan on their own, but I'd be willing to co-sign for them and let them make the payments and have it in their name and help them start establishing their credit at a young age that way.
Interesting. So whether when we were talking about bankruptcy 7, 11, or 13, if you've not paid your bills, they turn over to collection. Your creditor. And with those calls come harassment. Once you declare bankruptcy, is it true that those harassing phone calls can and do stop or should stop?
They have to stop, because once you file bankruptcy, all collections are stayed, all lawsuits are stayed, so there's no legal way for them to collect from you anymore. So the collection agents should not be allowed to call anymore because they can't make you pay.
How are wages garnished, David, and when does that stop?
So a wage garnishment occurs in this collection situation, not family court, when you get sued, don't answer, or you lose, and a judgment is entered against you, and then the creditor's attorney takes it to court and it's called supplemental proceedings, brings you back in and says, where do you work? And they get an attachment of your wages based on where you work, and there are certain rules as to how much money the employer has to withhold. There are limits on welfare numbers, if you can't take more money that would put you below the poverty line, that type of thing.
And is that would be true, so for child support, if it wasn't paid, someone's wages could be
Child
garnished?
support's different.
It is?
Child support is the family court will enter the order of garnishment against you, and that garnishment starts coming out of your pay based on the family court order as to how much you owe. And that really is not or should not be affected by a bankruptcy, whereas a wage garnishment that's based on a collection that can be no longer collected because you filed bankruptcy, that should stop.
And it does?
And it does, it should, and any money that was taken after the bankruptcy could be considered something called a preference. You can't choose which creditors you're going to pay or not pay. So if I pay you because I like you and I owe you money, but I don't pay my other creditors, then any money I paid you within a certain period of time before I filed bankruptcy, they can come to you and say, give it back.
Oh, they can?
Yeah.
So I understand when there's the reorganization during Chapter 11.
Or 13.
Or 13. The reorganization is done by the lawyer, or is it done by the courts?
Well,
who's getting paid when and what's that priority?
You create a plan.
The
lawyer.
With the lawyer.
Yeah, and the lawyer creates it with you.
The lawyer creates it, okay.
And then it's submitted to the court, and the court has to approve it.
Okay, so there's someone who's keeping count of that yes, in fact, it's been done.
Yeah. Well,
number
in
one,
fact,
then 3, then
there's
5.
a trustee who's appointed by the court, a federal court trustee,
okay,
who the payments go to. And the trustee is the one who's responsible for collecting the money from you and paying the creditors out. So the lawyer may do it in association with the trustee. The court approves the payment plan, but the trustee, who gets paid for doing this, collects all the money from you and pays your creditors.
Good to know. We certainly covered an awful lot about credit cards and debts and bankruptcy. We hope that your new year is a healthy and successful one. We thank you for tuning in to The Law Matters. Please do stay tuned. It matters to you.